And thank you for attending session 2 of the Universal Care. This for messaging for business. That we'll talk a little bit more about messaging here and than in the first part. So let me do a quick review. Session 1, we talked about strategic political maps, discussed the importance of mainstream business as being one of the 3 important parts of the winning strategy, winning target zone, whether it's one continuous curve or even if we look at the society as being kind of unhealthy, bimodal, winning it from one side, winning it from the Biden side would be very difficult because it would require 98% of support among Biden voters just to get to 50-50. In the meantime, we learned in the last session that there is support even in rural Republican districts, as long as the question is put to them in neutral terms. They tend to be majority support. At any rate, it will take visionaries from both of these groups. Then we talked a little bit about the characteristics of business, unlikely to have their own insurance, 2.5 times as likely to be on Medicaid, twice as likely to be uninsured, and unhappy with the current system. And when they given an opportunity to name the most critical problems of healthcare, they named cost, 89% versus 80% in the general population, complexity, 79% versus 69%. But their concern for fair access and medical bankruptcies, things like that, their concern was no less than the general population. And we talked about majority support coming from business owners and self-employed. They polled well, and their support tended to be fairly loyal to the idea. And the red district that voted for Trump both in 2016 and 2020 polled 55 to 35% in favor of a large tax to fund state-based universal care. So this raises a question of maybe we don't need to win them over quite so much as we need to figure out how to include them, or at least stop chasing them away. We talked about the differences in vocabulary between progressives and business owners. In session 2, we'll talk a little bit more about the relationships between those 3 groups. What do they have differing, and what do they have in common? And what's the historical problems? How can we maximize common attraction and minimize distraction? Then we'll finish up talking about changing face of business and how the various bills under consideration are going to affect business support. Have a breakout session in just a moment to discuss 2 questions. The first one is, assuming that we need the support, and we don't need all of these people, we just need a healthy percentage of these 3 groups. But assuming that these are the 3 winning groups, how are these groups different? A question that I'm interested in is which of these groups is most iffy in their support? And who has the most to lose if universal care does not pass? Who has the least to lose? So that's the first question. The second question is we've actually got three sets of relationships here between these groups. So what current and historical disagreements must be overcome for them to form a coalition? Yes, what are the historical obstacles and how can those obstacles be minimized? That's a lot, but I bet you won't have any trouble figuring out things to talk about. Could you call on the spokespeople and let's hear what range of things we talked about in the groups?
You know, you have some business owners that the thought, I think, of that are barely making it, how are they going to be able to afford providing any kind of health care for their employees? Versus the businesses who are doing well, are providing insurance, especially if they're medium-sized businesses, and they would love to figure out how to reduce those insurance costs, you know, for covering their employees. But you kind of have two. You have I think there's a big group of very small businesses that are kind of like, whoa, I'm barely getting by as it is. How am I going to be able to pay more, you know, to provide, even though I might like to, I don't know how I can do it.
Most to lose, people with most to lose are big business like Microsoft that have young employees right now, and they have a good program probably for their employees. I know the employees don't want to lose their benefits. Small government ideologues, people that believe in smaller governments. Businesses that don't provide insurance now, but would have to pay something to provide insurance to everyone. And the CEOs of insurance companies and hospitals. Those are the most, they would have the most to lose in a universal healthcare system. Least to lose would be small to middle-sized business owners. That's all we had for that category before we went on to talking about the historical obstacles to coalition building. And that was the difference between people that believe in government being big and providing good benefits and people that believe that that should not happen, and American individualism. People want to go it alone and don't want to take a coalition with each other. Some people. And how can, and let's see, question is government the solution? And then we talked about how could these obstacles be minimized, and we got into the pandemic as a good example of how a lesson from the pandemic. If my neighbor is not healthy, then I run the risk of being unhealthy myself.
Thank you, Marcia. And Mike?
I'm thinking the three groups that Warren put up in his chart, connected by purple arrows going both directions. For the progressive relationships with the moderate Democrats, we put the same things on our campaign trail: Medicare for all, social justice, but the moderate Democrats seem to be more tied with campaign contributions from business interests that would not like the idea of universal health care. And how do we bridge that? I don't think we got there. Obviously, education and coming to programs like this would help. Then between also in that group of moderate Democrats are a lot of union support, and there's a tight bond there that's hard to break. They kind of depend on each other, and we need to figure out ways of showing unions that in the long run, their hard-fought benefits in healthcare insurance are not likely to last very long, and that eventually more unions would come on board. And then bridging between the business people on the right of the midline. I don't know if we got into how to bridge that. Obviously, it's more conversations like we're having tonight.
We are in agreement. The moderate Democrats are probably our most iffy support, our biggest problem perhaps. We didn't dive into breaking it down, so that was actually very helpful, Mike. But we did talk a little bit more about some of the obstacles and how to overcome them. So in terms of particularly trying to bridge, I guess, progressives and the business conservatives. So a couple of ideas that that we talked about. One is trying to address some of the concerns, the distrust of government that some of these businesses have. We have to at least recognize their concern about government regulation. We didn't figure out how to do that, but we talked about that. Something else that we talked about is we can talk about our commonalities. When Warren went down some of their concerns, cost and complexity of healthcare are huge issues for business. Well, we all know about that. That's a common language that we can absolutely work on. And then a third suggestion was, what can we do to help build their tribe? We know that there are groups out there, such as the Business Leaders for Healthcare Transformation. I think that's their name. But how can we deal with some of the obstacles, for example, local chambers of commerce, but there must be other ways that we can, as the expression was, build their tribe.
The language and the values that separate are great. The progressives we followed the chat questions, tended to follow a more humanistic and moral point of view, whereas business people seemed committed to efficiency and cost control because that's how they make a living every day. From mainstream Democrats, they're interested in providing care, but not rocking the boat too much is what we thought. And that's one of the reasons that we thought the Affordable Care Act kind of is the way it is. As far as shared values, people are kind of tired of being knocked around by insurance companies. On the positive shared value side, being fair, having a system that's fair to everybody and just, and provides security. And the word security meant different things to different groups. For an individual, it often meant, I know what it's going to cost me in my insurance premium or my tax, and I know that I have insurance and I can go around with it and not worry about having to keep a job in order to have health care. And from a business point of view, knowing that you can easily attract employees because you have a reasonable, affordable plan that they have access to, that everybody has access to, including owners, and that that your freedom was the other common value, that you get to take it around. Obstacles to overcome. One of the big ones is in spite of the recent Congressional Budget Office analysis of HR 1384, is how much does it really cost? Is there a detailed analysis? And what we noted was that certain states like Colorado and Washington have single payer coming up in the legislature, and they have online models that will tell you based on your age and based on age and income what it's going to cost you. And you could probably get a lot more support if such an analysis were available. The other thing is that choose your words carefully to get healthcare reform, depending on who you're talking to, because a lot of on one end of the spectrum, they don't want to be associated. People on the conservative end really don't want to be associated with what looks like a socialist platform. They'd much rather have something that looks like infrastructure that helps support the whole environment that we have.
Okay, thanks. I really appreciated all those comments. The only thing that didn't come up, maybe because we don't have a lot of people who sat in my chair as a plant manager. I got along okay with the union people, but when our union president, we were represented by the steel workers, when our union president came into my office, which happened over a 20-year period, how many times would you guess that I was thinking, oh, he's coming to make my life easier and to make the company more sustainable? And of course, the answer is never. So, I mean, I think that is a bridge that has to be kind of rebuilt. And I'm really impressed with some of the Labor Council people, including, I can't remember the name quickly, but somebody out of the state of Washington who is saying, who actually wrote a letter saying we've got to stop circling our wagons around unsustainable healthcare way of doing that. And I was very impressed with that. And I've talked to some of my business friends that say, here's some people who, at least what they're talking about is really encouraging. And we should match them with the rhetoric that says, you know, if you want to get along, we want to get along, because this is a common issue. But it's also an issue that can go badly. When I, as a plant manager, wanted to get something done, if I walked through the door holding hands, so to speak, with the union president, we'd pretty much never had any problem getting something done. But if it was one of our issue or the others of the issue, then the other one wasn't coming through the door. But I think that's one of the things that has to be repaired, or at least for this one issue. It's okay to disagree with some things, but on this one issue, my goodness, we've got to get along on this and do things that are good for all of us. So moving along, but I'm just going to talk quickly about how business is changing. Here are the, it used to be that if you could get a few prominent community business owners and leaders to support an issue, the rest would be inclined to follow, but that's changed somewhat. I live in a very democratic county with a lot of government employees. In fact, if you look at the top 10 employees in our county that actually account for over 43% of the total non-farm employment, it's pretty easy to notice some things about this list. Oregon State University, Samaritan Health Services, Hewlett Packard. Oh, there is actually a private company, Corvallis School District, Corvallis Clinic, Benton County, City of Corvallis. Then we get down to an engineering company, CH2M Hill, and then we get to a couple of software companies. But the private businesses in this top 10 are only 10% of that top 10 group. And the thing that is a little bit concerning to me on that is that the number of employees of private companies in the top 10 has fallen by half in the last 10 years. Hewlett Packard used to employ 3,000 workers. CH2M had 500. All of these companies are shrinking, moving, and another thing to be concerned about is that they, when I'm talking about non-government, non-medical. They're getting fewer and fewer in this county. When I look one county over across the river, there's actually a Republican county that has more private employers. ATI, Allegheny Technologies, that was my company. I ran the smaller of two plants there. But here again, the major employers are the hospital, public schools, community college, the county. We have a Target distribution center. We have a couple of metals business, a retirement system, Oregon freeze-dried food. But here again, the number of jobs has declined private non-medical jobs in our area has declined to about half. And of many of these companies remaining, they may have employees in the area, but they don't necessarily have managers. The company where I worked, the 5-person human resources wing turned into a fax machine to North Carolina. You write your question down, you put it in the fax machine, you get an answer back from somebody or a form to fill out. And I might say that the company I ran with 500 employees closed in December, and they don't know if we'll reopen. So knowing your product is actually one of the important issues of coalition building. If you're going to agree on something, you have to know what it is. In this case, we have to understand actually the nuts and bolts of the legislation, how it will benefit or harm each of the coalition members. So what does business need to know before they can decide to support universal care? I would call on people if we had just a few more minutes, but I want to get through this. Business people, of course, they hate uncertainty. They want to know what's going to happen to their costs. We've seen numbers of these companies going out of business or losing to business to other competitors. So they want to know, will I be able to stay in business? They want to know what will happen to my employees' cost and quality of care. So now first, since the keys to business support from any Medicare for All bill is the funding details, I'm going to start by just doing an analysis of the Jayapal bill with respect to the funding details and which of the details is pro-business, which is anti-business. Oh, wait, there isn't any funding plan. So let me look at the Sanders bill, see how it apportions costs to businesses and employers and employees. Oh, wait, there's no funding details at all. So where there is no information, there are rumors. Some unofficial proposals have business costs going up dramatically. Some have business costs about the same. Some have employer costs going down. Which will win for business people? They're trying to figure out who's on my side, who's against me, who's going to back me. A lot of fear and uncertainty in the mind of business. And there should be on the part of everyone. I mean, I tell people, why support a plan before you know the details? I mean, it could be that they're going to put more of the cost on the poor. I wouldn't be for that. So, I mean, the details really are important, and particularly for business, they can't make a decision before the details are known. So how do you approach business people if the details aren't known? And these are the recommendations that I would make. Admit that the details just aren't ready. Don't tell them things that you can't back up. Explain the theory of universal care and say it should actually be a good thing, and to offer to keep them informed of any details as they become available. Build a relationship by listening and promise to fight for reduced costs for business. I think that's one of the things that helps build the bridges between progressives and business, and potentially between unions and business, is to say, we're not going to throw anybody under the bus on this one. We're going to make it turn out well for everybody. So some observations: business owners and self-employed are even more dissatisfied than others, but they're uncertain what to do. They're reluctant to join current universal care advocacy groups. And it's not clear that their reluctance to join reflects I mean, the poll says they're not reluctant to talk about the concept. I mean, many of them are not. But they, we had the Healthcare Now strategy conference over last weekend. And a legitimate question is, how many Trump supporters that also support universal health care were there? How many conservative business people who also support universal care were there? And I think you have to stop and consider about what are the reasons that those people weren't there, even though there is evidence that many of them do support the concept. So with that, I'm just going to take the very last few remaining minutes here, because I know it's late for some of you. But let's just open up the last couple minutes here for discussion. Pictures of grandchildren, how did that get in here?
When Alan did his report from their group, they talked a little bit about socialists and addressing the aspect of socialism. And I think that's an important thing too, because everybody, a lot of the people on the right, it seems like they all associate socialism with communism. And yet it seems to me that there's so many other countries that are not socialist countries that have universal health care for everybody. And I think it almost would behoove us to highlight those countries that aren't typically considered socialist, a socialist economy, and yet they still provide their people universal health care, equally. I think we need to combat that a little bit more.
Yeah, Catherine, I think that's an excellent point. And something that I point out on occasion is I think the one thing that's missing from that discussion is proportionality. So it's very easy for people on the right to say, oh, if you want this one thing, then pretty soon we're going to turn into Venezuela. And I think if in the messaging we say we just want this one thing, rather than implying that if you give us an inch, we'll take a mile. I think we want an honest inch.
Right.
And then,
Catherine, we already have all four major healthcare systems operational in the United States, including socialized medicine. I was in the Air Force 3 years, socialized medicine. The government owns the hospitals. All the people in the hospitals, work for the government. Everybody got terrific health care. I got an $8 baby. I'll go for that. $8, little boy, wonderful. We have single payer. The seniors have single payer. Canada has single payer. Well, we have single payer here. That's Medicare, right? Single payer. The government pays. The problem is it's only 80%. And we have the insurance system. Germany has the insurance system. France has the insurance system. Their costs are less than half of ours because they control what the insurance companies can charge. So we have the insurance system, but we don't control it. They can do whatever they want, and we have that system too. The fourth system is like they have in Bangladesh and perhaps India and some other places, which is if you have money, you get fixed. And of course, we have that here too. And if you have enough money, you're fine. You can get fixed up. I subscribe to The Economist, and I'm a businessman. I'm interested in costs, and I subscribe to The Economist. Every year they come out with the world in figures. United States, it was $10,268 per person. This is a couple of years ago, 2019 figures. Canada, $4,700. Germany, $4,900. France, $4,500. UK socialized medicine, $3,900. Australia, they had single payer, $4,900. So everybody was less than us. Did they live longer, or did they live less as long? Well, we didn't live as long as any of those countries did. So our results were not as good, and our costs were twice as much. And if you can we have the best politicians that money can buy. And the insurance companies have bought these guys, okay? And it's our job to sell people, including business, starting with business, who want lower costs and better health on, what the facts are.
Thank you. So we have Paul Warwick and then Pam Gronemeyer.
Yeah, I would like to ask, maybe for a future program, if we could talk to business people that are advocating for Medicare for all and actively going out and meeting businesses and approaching them about Medicare for all, and maybe hear some of the stories and accounts from them on what they've used, what worked for them, what challenges they had. I would find that really, really useful.
Warren, thank you so much. In your summary, there's a couple things that really caught my attention. One is build a relationship. How critical. And the whole business of I respect the business owner and their opinions about their business. So I owe that respect to them, but they really don't earn my respect if in fact they make suggestions that really are destructive to either their business or to their employee. And so it's a two-way street, but that relationship is so critical. The issue of funding not being available. The businessman knows what good business methods are to really build a profitable business. And the same is true when he's buying something. He wants to understand how is it being funded. And there has to be a business plan instead of waiting for the CBO of either Sanders or Jayapal or others to do the sausage making and all that kind of stuff. And God only knows what's going to come out of that with compromises. There has to be very specific ways of extracting money from the households and the businesses to build the trust fund. And don't bother in talking about how to distribute it. The critical part is how you collect that money. And I'd like to have more of a discussion around that. The final issue is, do the business people really love this business of a fringe benefit that's non-taxable? And I would surely want to get rid of the private insurance companies that that extract money out of the system. And there's ways of making that work. And then the whole business of this fringe benefit, it seems to me that's a crazy sort of a thing that wastes money and puts a lot of complications and fragmentation within the system. And I would suggest getting rid of that. And I think we'd have the cheers of the businessman.
Yeah, if I can respond to that, that's a whole another hour or two's discussion. And I'm appreciating the fact that you put some time into thinking about that. But I think we really do need a plan. When I look at the Robert Pollin is probably the most quoted, as well as Gerald Friedman, and there's reasons why those plans fall short, and I'm happy to discuss that further. But I do think that actually knowing some details, or at least putting some principles on the line, and making it clear. Right now, business doesn't know what to think because they've got some groups. I went to the Healthcare Now and Labor Coalition meeting a year ago and listened to people saying, boy, we're really going to stick it to business on this one. That sort of talk is not helpful for the business owners want to circle the wagons and protect themselves rather than build a coalition when they hear things like that. But
Thank you.
thanks for the comments.
So I'm sorry, I had said Paul and then Pam, and then I was looking at the way they showed up on my screen and I called Tom before I got to Pam. So I'm sorry, Pam, for skipping over you.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to ask, how do you think we can reach out to business leaders? I mean, they're not, I mean, do you think that they would want to come to the Healthcare Now meeting? I mean, or, you know, I mean, I don't know, you know, I mean, that's my thing is always trying to find time or places how to get into the groups to talk to them, business leaders.
Well, I think local is a good place to start, and it's been suggested before that some of the best selling is done business people to business people. But the point I'll make about my old company is they said, you know, we're probably for this, but we have to wait and see how the sausage making turns out. We'll either support it or we'll have to kill it if it turns out to be destructive to our ability to stay in business.
We did actually have some business owners coming in, but it was typically like the very small business owner, the bookstore person with 2 or 3 employees, themselves, their partner and one more or something, or the self-employed artists or musicians. So there are business owners who are involved, but how do we get the bigger business owners in?
That's what I'm bigger, you know, the restaurant, that kind of thing, bigger, as Warren has said, because that's what's going to tilt the scale for either state or federal.
And I will make one comment to that. You know, when I showed the slide of the biggest employers in our county, we've got a situation where, you know, I'm talking to the CEO of our local 5-hospital medical group, and they're actually interested in this. And whether there are fewer, you know, maybe true private businesses, I think actually some of the hospital groups supporting this, and I think that's actually possible. They particularly are concerned about the fee-for-service model when they're not delivering many services. And so one said to me, you know, if you could, you know, Warren, if you could get us out of the fee-for-service business, we're really tired of that hamster wheel. We'd rather deliver medical services rather than spend so much time writing bills.
That's a really good point.
They favor like a global budget type system, and I think their support could really help.
Right. So going to the large employers that Warren had on that list, some of them were things like the hospital, and especially safety net hospitals and rural hospitals should be approachable if we can figure out how to get in that door and start that conversation. But as far as the towns and counties and those sorts of things, the resolutions that Public Citizen is encouraging is a way to get towns to, because right now they're like hands off, it's a political thing, but if you get a resolution passed, and that's what your constituents are telling you to do. So that's another way to approach it.
Yes, and Mike Huntington is doing a great job of doing that in Oregon with Benton County and the City Council, and do we have the school district now?
One more hearing. We're inviting everybody to attend on February 18th. We think it'll pass. There's one holdout.
Anyway, so that is one of the ways to find community leadership. But some of the rest of it is harder. I mean, it's hard to, what is the number for Home Depot to call up the manager and get them to swear their support?
Right.
That's a difficult one. But I think everybody, you know, as I look around the faces here, I think everybody is trying to do a good job of reaching out to business, and I'm just trying to reinforce that effort and give you a few more ideas of how we can all do better at that.
Warren, thank you so much for sharing your insight into the business community. We really appreciate that.